Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, the 22nd of April 1616, was a Spanish writer who is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the Spanish language and one of the world's preeminent novelists. His major work, Don Quixote, considered to be the first modern novel, is a classic of Western literature, and is regarded amongst the best works of fiction ever written. His influence on the Spanish language has been so great that the language is often called la lengua de Cervantes. He has also been dubbed el príncipe de los ingenios. In 1569, in forced exile from Castile, Cervantes moved to Rome, where he worked as chamber assistant of a cardinal. He then enlisted as a soldier in a Spanish Navy infantry regiment and continued his military life until 1575, when he was captured by Barbary pirates. After 5 years of captivity, he was released by his captors on payment of a ransom by his parents and the Trinitarians, a Catholic religious order, and he subsequently returned to his family in Madrid. In 1585, Cervantes published a pastoral novel named La Galatea. He worked as a purchasing agent for the Spanish Armada, and later as a tax collector for the government. In 1597, discrepancies in his accounts for 3 years previous landed him in the Crown Jail of Seville. In 1605, he was in Valladolid when the immediate success of the first part of his Don Quixote, published in Madrid, signaled his return to the literary world. In 1607, he settled in Madrid, where he lived and worked until his death. During the last 9 years of his life, Cervantes solidified his reputation as a writer. He published the novelas ejemplars in 1613, The Journey to Parnassus in 1614, and the Ocho Comedias y Ocho Intrimacies and the second part of Don Quixote in 1615. His last work, Los Trabajos de Percials y Sigismunda, was published posthumously in 1617. Birth and early life. It is assumed that Cervantes was born in Alcalá de Henares, a Castilian city about 35 kilometers northeast from Madrid, probably on the 29th of September 1547. The probable date of his birth was determined from records in the church register. Given the tradition of naming a child after the feast day of his birth, he was baptized in Alcalá de Henares on the 9th of October 1547 at the parish church of Santa Maria la Mer. The Register of Baptisms records the following: on Sunday, the 9th day of the month of October, the year of our Lord 1547, Miguel, son of Rodrigo Cervantes and his wife Leonor, was baptized. His godfathers were Juan Pardo. He was baptized by the Reverend Bachelor Bartolomé Serrano, priest of Our Lady. Witnesses: Baltazar Vazquez, sexton, and I, who baptized him and signed this in my name. Bachelor Serrano. Miguel at birth was not surnamed Cervantes Saavedra. He adopted the Saavedra name as an adult. By Spanish naming conventions, his second surname was that of his mother, Cortinas. Miguel's father, Rodrigo, was a barber surgeon from Córdoba who set bones, performed bloodlettings, and attended lesser medical needs. At that time, it was common for barbers to do surgery as well. His paternal grandfather, Juan de Cervantes, was an influential lawyer who held several administrative positions. His uncle was mayor of Cabra for many years. His mother, Leonor de Cortinas, was a native of Arganda del Rey and the third daughter of a nobleman, who lost his fortune and had to sell his daughter into matrimony in 1543. This led to a very awkward marriage and several affairs by Rodrigo. Leonor died on the 19th of October 1593. Little is known of Cervantes' early years. It seems he spent much of his childhood moving from town to town with his family. During this time, he met a young barmaid named Josefina Catalina de Perez. The couple fell madly in love and plotted to run away together. Her father discovered the plans and forbade Josefina from ever seeing Cervantes again, perhaps because of the young man's poor prospects of ever rising from poverty. Miguel's own father was embargoed for debt. The court records of the proceedings show a very poor household, while some of his biographers argue that he studied at the University of Salamanca. There is no solid evidence for supposing that he did so. There has been speculation also that Cervantes studied with the Jesuits in Córdoba, Seville. His siblings were Andrea, Luisa, Rodrigo, Magdalena and Juan, known solely because he is mentioned in his father's will. Military service and captivity. The reasons that forced Cervantes to leave Spain remain uncertain. Whether he was a student of the same name, a sword-wielding fugitive from justice, or fleeing from a royal warrant of arrest for having wounded a certain Antonio de Segura in a duel, is unclear. Like many young Spanish men who wanted to further their careers, Cervantes left for Italy. In Rome he focused his attention on Renaissance art, architecture, and poetry. Knowledge of Italian literature is discernible in his work. He found a powerful impetus to revive the contemporary world in light of its accomplishments. Thus, Cervantes' stay in Italy, as revealed in his later works, might be in part a desire for a return to an earlier period of the Renaissance. By 1570, Cervantes had enlisted as a soldier in a regiment of the Spanish Navy Marines, Infanteria de Marina, stationed in Naples, then a possession of the Spanish crown. He was there for about a year before he saw active service. In September 1571, Cervantes sailed on board the Marquesa, part of the galley fleet of the Holy League that defeated the Ottoman fleet on October 7 in the Battle of Lepanto, in the Gulf of Patras. Though taken down with fever, Cervantes refused to stay below, and asked to be allowed to take part in the battle, saying he would rather die for his God and his king than keep under cover. He fought on board a vessel, and received 3 gunshot wounds, 2 in the chest and 1 which rendered his left arm useless. In Journey to Parnassus he was to say that he had lost the movement of the left hand for the glory of the right. Cervantes looked back on his conduct in the battle with pride. He believed he had taken part in an event that shaped the course of European history. After the Battle of Lepanto, Cervantes remained in hospital in Messina, Italy, for about 6 months, before his wounds were sufficiently healed to allow his joining the colors again. From 1572 to 1575, based mainly in Naples, he continued his soldier's life. He participated in expeditions to Corfu and Navarino, and saw the fall of Tunis and Ligulette to the Turks in 1574. On September 6 of 1575, Cervantes set sail on the galley Sol from Naples to Barcelona, with letters of commendation to the king from the Duke of Sessa. On the morning of September 26, as the Sol approached the Catalan coast, it was attacked by Ottoman pirates and he was taken to Algiers, which had become one of the main and most cosmopolitan cities of the Ottoman Empire, and was kept here in captivity between the years of 1575 and 1580. After 5 years spent as a slave in Algiers, and 4 unsuccessful escape attempts, he was ransomed by his parents and the Trinitarians and returned to his family in Madrid. Not surprisingly, this traumatic period of Cervantes' life supplied subject matter for several of his literary works, notably The Captive's Tale in Don Quixote and the 2 plays set in Algiers, El Trato de Argel and Los Baños de Argel, as well as episodes in a number of other writings, although never in straight autobiographical form. Later life. Cervantes led a middle-class life after his return to Spain. Like almost all authors of his day, he was unable to support himself through his writings. Two periods of his life that are very well documented are his years of work in Andalusia as a purchasing agent for the Spanish Navy. This led to his imprisonment for a few months in Seville after a banker where he had deposited crown funds went bankrupt. Also, he worked as a tax collector, traveling from town to town collecting back taxes due to crown. He applied unsuccessfully for one of 4 vacant positions in the New World, one of them as an accountant for the port of Cartagena. At the time he was living in Valladolid, then briefly the capital, and finishing Don Quixote Part 1. He was presumably working in the banking industry, or a related occupation where his accounting skills could be put to use. He was turned down for a position as secretary to Pedro Fernandez de Castro y Andrade, the Count of Lemos, although he did receive some type of pension from him, which permitted him to write full-time during his final years. His last known written words, the dedication to Perseus y Sigismunda, were written, he tells us, after having received extreme unction. He died in 1616 of type 2 diabetes. His burial place in Madrid was reportedly rediscovered in March 2015, but his unpublished manuscripts were mostly lost. Literary pursuits. In Esquivias, Toledo, on 12 December 1584, he married the much younger Catalina de Salazar y Palacios, daughter of Fernando de Salazar y Vaz Mediano and Catalina de Palacios. Her uncle Alonso de Quesada y Salazar is said to have inspired the character of Don Quixote. Over the next 20 years, Cervantes led a nomadic existence, working as a purchasing agent for the Spanish Armada and as a tax collector. He suffered bankruptcy and was imprisoned at least twice for irregularities in his accounts. Between 1596 and 1600, he lived primarily in Seville. In 1606, Cervantes settled in Madrid, where he remained for the rest of his life. In 1585, Cervantes published his first major work, La Galatea, a pastoral romance, at the same time that some of his plays, now lost, except for El Trato de Argel and El Circo de Numancia, were playing on the stages of Madrid. La Galatea received little contemporary notice, and Cervantes never wrote the continuation for it, which he repeatedly promised to do. Cervantes next turned his attention to drama, hoping to derive an income from that source, but his plays fail. Aside from his plays, his most ambitious work in verse was Viaje del Parnaso, an allegory which consisted largely of a rather tedious though good-natured review of contemporary poets. Cervantes himself realized that he was deficient in poetic talent, if a remark which Cervantes himself makes in the prologue of Don Quixote is to be taken literally. The idea of the work occurred to him while in jail. Cervantes' idea was to give a picture of real life and manners, and to express himself in clear language. The intrusion of everyday speech into a literary context was acclaimed by the reading public. The author stayed poor until January 1605, when the first part of Don Quixote appeared. The popularity of Don Quixote led to the publication of an unauthorized continuation of it by an unknown writer, who masqueraded under the name of Alonso Fernandez de Avellaneda. Cervantes produced his own continuation, or second part, of Don Quixote, which made its appearance in 1615. He had promised the publication of a second part in 1613 in the foreword to the Novelas Ejemplares, a year before the publication of Avellaneda's book. Don Quixote has been regarded chiefly as a novel of purpose. It is stated again and again that he wrote it in order to satirize the chivalric romance and to challenge the popularity of a form of literature that had been a favorite of the general public for more than a century. Don Quixote certainly reveals much narrative power, considerable humor, a mastery of dialogue, and a forceful style. Of the two parts written by Cervantes, perhaps the first is the more popular with the general public, containing the famous episodes of the tilting at windmills, the attack on the flock of sheep, the vigil in the courtyard of the inn, and the episode with the barber and the shaving basin. The second part shows more constructive insight, better delineation of character, improved style, and more realism and probability in its action. Most people agree that it is richer and more profound. In 1613 he published a collection of tales, the exemplary novels, some of which had been written earlier. The picaroon strain, already made familiar in Spain through the picaresque novels of Lazarillo de Tormes and his successors, appears in one or another of them, especially in the Rinconet y Cortadillo. In 1614 he published the Viaje del Parnaso, and in 1615, the 8 comedies and 8 new interludes. At the same time, Cervantes continued working on Los Trabajos de Percials y Sigismunda, a novel of adventurous travel, completed just before his death, and appearing posthumously in January 1617. While April 23, 1616 was recorded as the date of his death in some references, and is the date on which his death is widely commemorated, Cervantes in fact died in Madrid the previous day, April 22. He was buried on the 23rd of April. The cause of his death, according to Antonio López Alonso, a modern physician who has examined the surviving documentation, was type 2 diabetes, a result of a cirrhosis of the liver. This is the best explanation for the intense thirst he complained of. The cirrhosis was not caused by alcoholism. Cervantes was too productive, especially in his final years, to have been an alcoholic. In accordance with Cervantes' will, he was buried in the neighboring convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians, in central Madrid. His bones went missing in 1673 when building work was done at the convent, and were known to have been taken to a different convent and returned later. A project promoted and led by Fernando de Prado began in 2014 to rediscover his remains. In January 2015, it was reported that researchers searching for Cervantes' remains had found part of a casket bearing his initials, MC, at the convent. Francisco Echeverria, the forensic anthropologist leading the search, said, "Remains of caskets were found, wood, rocks, some bone fragments, and indeed one of the fragments of a board of one of the caskets had the letters M. C. formed in tacks." The first significant search for Cervantes' remains had been launched in May 2014 and had involved the use of infrared cameras, 3D scanners and ground-penetrating radar. The team had identified 33 alcoves where bones could be stored. On the 17th of March 2015, it was reported that Cervantes' remains had been discovered, along with those of his wife and others, at the convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians. Through documentary research, archaeologists stated that they had identified the remains as those of Cervantes. Clues from Cervantes' life, such as the loss of the use of his left hand at age 24 and the fact that he had taken at least one bullet to the chest, were hoped to help in the identification. Historian Fernando de Prado had spent more than 4 years trying to find funding before Madrid City Council had agreed to pay. DNA testing would now be carried out in an attempt to confirm the findings. On the 11th of June 2015, Cervantes was given a formal burial at a Madrid convent, containing a monument holding bone fragments that were believed to have been the author's. The city mayor Ana Botella and military attended the event.